the resin that's in there generally is going to last 12 to 15 years. Now, some municipal supplies now that, all of them have to chlorinate the water to make it safe. Some have started switching to chloramines over the past, say, 5 or 10 years. That will significantly shorten the life of any water softener resin. Now, our Genesis line uses Aldex 10% resin, which is a much more durable resin. Now, that will help increase the life of it, but eventually the chloramines especially, are going to get to that resin. And even iron levels, up to 2 parts per million, a softener can handle it, but it does start to shorten the life of the system. So, with that being said, we want to determine how much you need, what type, and then get you the supplies that you need. Now, inside of here is not just resin. 2/3 of this tank is filled with resin, but going down the center is a riser tube. The water that goes into your house is going to be on one side of this tube, and the water that goes through the resin is on the other. With softeners, to replace your resin and not replace your riser tube doesn't really make a lot of sense. Your riser tube can also be affected by chloramines. It's plastic. Chloramines will break down plastic resin beads as well as the plastic screen that's on the bottom. So this is your bottom distributor. It has slats in it so the water can pass through, but not the resin. Over time, this can get brittle, okay? And if it gets too brittle and the water pressure pushes the resin up against it, or even the gravel underbedding, you can get it to crack, and then the resin gets on the wrong side of the tube and ends up in your house. So that is a nightmarish situation that you don't want to incur in your home, or you simply just don't have any water pressure when your softener is in service, because the resin at the bottom has now turned to a soft plastic, almost like a peanut butter substance, and you're not going to get water flow. That is a really good indicator that your resin needs to be replaced. So when you're doing this, first and foremost, let's determine if you do need new resin, how much do you need, and then whether or not you're going to be able to tackle this project on your own. It is basically a two-man job. So taking your water softener, the bypass that's on there, or if you have a built-in bypass into your plumbing supply, you want to put the unit in bypass, relieve the pressure, and then disconnect your control head from your bypass. Again, this is a general video, so every bypass, every installation is going to be a little bit different. But generally, you want to get that control head disconnected from your bypass, and then unscrew your head from the tank. And then once you do that, you'll see your center tube in there, and you'll see down in there, and you got your resin. Now, turning that tank over or siphoning, you can siphon some of the water out, or you can simply, with another person, turn that tank over, maybe if you can get it outside. And generally, what you want to do is get it turned over and get a couple of Rubbermaid bins is usually a good way to do it, maybe 2 or 3 of them, and have 2 guys hold it upside down or turn it on its side, and you can use a hose to put water up in there and kind of force the resin out. But it is a tough task, so 2 people is definitely recommended. And then once you get that riser tube out, it's not connected to the bottom, it's just sitting in there loosely. Once you get that riser tube out, you get all the resin out, you want to determine, do you want to replace it with basic 8% resin or 10% resin? We usually always recommend you get a funnel. This will make life a lot easier when filling it. It also comes with a cap. So when you go to take out all your resin and you replace your riser tube, you're basically going to cut it to the same length as your old riser tube. So when you receive it, it's going to be longer than what you need. You're going to cut it nice and flush, kind of clean up the edges, put it back in the tank, and you're going to have to put one of these caps in the riser tube, because what you don't want is to have resin go down into that riser tube and actually cause an issue with the resin getting on the other side. So that cap is going to be important to block that resin from going in there. Now that's just going to be temporary. So once it's in the tank, you put your riser over it, and you're going to fill the tank. This kind of shows the tank with the control head off of it. You've got your cap that you get with your funnel. You're going to take your cap, put it in that riser tube. Once you center that tube, it's going to fit into kind of a dimple in the bottom of the tank. So it'll be nice and settled in that bottom. Now, if it doesn't sit exactly straight, it's not a big deal. You can straighten it later when you go to put the head on. You're going to put your funnel on, and then you're going to pour your resin in. These larger systems, it's really important that you do get gravel underbedding. Gravel underbedding does help with flow rate on bigger systems. It's not as impactful on smaller systems, but on bigger systems, it is important to help keep the flow rate up and less pressure on that bottom distributor basket. So once you've now loaded the resin in the tank, it's gonna fill it up to about 2/3 of the tank. You are not filling the tank all the way to the top. That is a different type of a system. 99% of the softeners out there are going to be 2/3 full, maybe slightly less. It might appear that way, but that is the way they're engineered. There needs to be about 1/3 of the tank that is freeboard space so the resin can expand. Then once you when you got all your resin in there, you remove your cap, you take your control head, you want to screw it back down, make sure that you center that tube so you can get it down on there, and then simply tighten it down a good half turn past hand tight, and then reconnect your system to your bypass. And you're going to need to then slowly let the water back into the system. I usually recommend that when you go to put the water back into your system, you go to open up your bypass, whatever type bypass you have, and you go to supply it, you want to start a manual regeneration and get the system into a backwash or a rinse. Because once you start pushing the water back into the control valve, into the tank, you want to force that trapped air out and down the drain rather than up into the house plumbing. So that's a really quick pointer on attaching your system and getting it back online, is to start a regeneration. Once you're all hooked up, you don't have any leaks, you start a manual regeneration, and then you crack open your water supply to the unit, and it will simultaneously push the air out down the drain. You'll start to get some discoloration from the liquid moisture that's on the resin. You get that out down the drain, let it rinse for a good couple of minutes, and then you can just bring it back around and start a full-on regeneration and get yourself back to soft water again.